Live long and prosper.
Engage.
On screen.
I'm giving it all she's got, Captain.
Do it.
Photon torpedoes armed and ready to launch.
He's dead, Jim.
Red alert.
Today is a good day to die.
I'm a doctor, not a zookeeper.
We are Borg.
Make it so.
Warp speed, now.
Hi everyone, welcome to Trekily. This is AWC. I'm solo again this episode, but we will return to the regular format for Picard Episode 6. Today we're talking about Picard Episode 5, Stardust City Rag. And there will be spoilers, so if you haven't watched it already, why are you here? Watch it, then come back and listen to the show. If you have already watched it, let's just warp into it. So the episode starts with 7 of 9 in a flashback launching a rescue operation to get back Egypt. Now, Egypt has been captured. All his Borg components have been stripped off his body. He's obviously in a lot of pain. And it actually starts with a very graphic scene of him, of his eye basically being torn from its socket. It was quite graphic. I didn't quite like the graphicness of it, particularly that scene. It's a sign of things to come, though, as this is really one of the darkest episodes of Picard we've had so far. Not so much gritty. Well, it was gritty. But not so much gritty, but just dark with little sprinkles of comedy that for me didn't quite work. But I'll get into that later. So 7 of 9 manages to disable the people who are torturing him and stripping him for parts. And it's clear that he must have been in a lot of pain and beyond saving, as 7 of 9, decides to mercy kill him. And it was such a heartbreaking scene, particularly because we haven't seen Egypt since the end of Voyager. She holds him tight. You can really see the pain in 7 of 9's face. And I think that's a tribute to the great acting from Jeri Ryan. It was such a heartbreaking scene. She refers to Egypt as her child. You can feel her pain as she holds a dying Egypt. It was quite sad, actually. But it's clear that harvesting Borg components have become a big business. The Romulans have an entire cube to pull from. We've heard you talking about how Borg and XBs in particular were seen as property to be exploited, hazards to be warehoused, or as both. And I'm sure that will play a larger role in how the Borg are seen less as a force to be reckoned with now, but as something to be exploited. In present day, we see Picard and 7 talk in his holographic home away from home. I really like this scene. We can see that 7 has become much more comfortable in her humanity, and actually a hard drinker. So we can see that she's actually become also very jaded. We find out that 7 has become a ranger, a kind of policing group trying to fill the void in places where there is no law. Picard points out that they are taking the law into their own hands, and 7 declares, "What law?" Picard says, "Well, point taken." I really like this interaction because we see Picard kind of challenge 7's choices, but also finds a sort of middle ground. He wasn't trying to make her feel bad for being with the Fenris Rangers, but still point out that they've appointed themselves judge and jury. During her run on Voyager, we've seen 7 grow in terms of what she thinks is right or wrong. She had a lot of moral conflicts, urging the surrender of an injured Species 8472 instead of helping it in order to try and protect the crew. Her obsession with the Omega particle, her trying to atone for her time as a Borg. When the Doctor, quote-unquote, malfunctions on Voyager, he points out to Janeway that simply resetting or removing parts of his memory really wasn't fair to him, especially since Janeway and the rest of the crew have allowed him to grow into an individual. When Picard tells her that they're trying to save someone who will most likely die if they don't get to her first, we see 7 become intrigued. We know that she will, of course, take up the cause within this episode. We get to see more of the other crew this episode too, particularly Rafi and Agnes. You can see Rafi and Rios have known each other for a long time. We find out 7 is infamous, and that enough time has passed that Picard, having been previously assimilated, is more of a distant memory in the Alpha Quadrant, for at least for Rios, as he talks about how he forgot that Picard was a Borg. And I didn't have an issue with that at all, because if you think about it, it's been 35 years since that incident. So it's more distant history now. Now, before Rafi leaves Picard to beam down to whatever thing she was there for, we can start to see that Picard and Rafi's relationship is starting to mend. We find out that she has a son, and her son and wife are expecting a newborn child. It's clear that after the Mars attack, Rafi's life really hit a downward spiral. She says she's clean, but I can see her having another relapse as we keep getting hints of her substance abuse issues. It was a really sad scene, but we know that even though she said her goodbye to Picard, that after this, she's coming back to the La Sirena, which is Rio's ship. It's clear that her arc will take her into a position where hopefully she can mend her relationship with not just Picard, but with her son and her family and anyone else that she may have let down because of her substance abuse issues. I'm going to get into Agnes later in this episode, but we got a few scenes with her that I really liked, particularly when they approach Freecloud and get bombarded with holographic pop-ups. I find it funny that Eleanor didn't get a pop-up, and I think that speaks to the connectivity we have in the future. It's likely that all these other characters have lived in a very close proximity and interacted with technology that when they arrive in Freecloud, the advertising knows what to advertise to all of them. Eleanor didn't get that, I think, because a life he lived before this didn't involve much interaction with technology. I guess think of the difference between us living in the city where we have fast internet and are constantly connected versus someone who may have a laptop but lives out in the sticks with either no internet or a very slow internet connection. The exposure to whatever galactic internet they have was much less for Eleanor, so he gets to avoid these ads which annoy everybody else because they're used to it, versus Eleanor, where this might be a newer thing for him, so he was maybe a little disappointed that he actually didn't get an advertisement. We find out that Maddox has escaped the Tal Shiar to Freecloud and has a meeting with someone named Giselle, who loaned him the funds to conduct his research. I love that they serve Tranya in the bar where Maddox meets Giselle. When Giselle finds out that the Tal Shiar are after Maddox, she essentially decides to hand him over in exchange for either money or some other monetary value, some kind of trade. Her group boasts a request for someone to broker the exchange, and this is how our crew finds out he's in trouble. They go down in silly costumes with a classic pose as other people scheme. Eleanor, of course, is the one who announces his naivety to what's going on throughout the whole thing. Seven, of course, knows of Giselle and offers herself as bait to get Maddox. The whole thing goes awry, and we are, of course, find out that Seven actually had met Giselle before and had wanted to get close to Giselle so she could avenge Egypt, as Giselle is the one who's running the business that led to Egypt's demise, capturing former Borg drones, getting Borg technology, and selling it probably in the black market for a profit, regardless of whether or not the person that had the parts was still alive or not. We get a classic Picard scene where he talks Seven of Nine out of taking revenge on Giselle, and they escape with Maddox in tow. Before Seven leaves to rejoin the Rangers, we see an interesting scene between her and Picard, with some really great acting between Ryan and Stewart. Picard offers a lift, and she says her ride's on its way. She offers him a token, which I'm sure he'll use in a future episode to get Seven to return to help them. He says that he was glad about the choice she made, but it becomes apparent that the only reason she really spared Giselle in the first place was more to spare Picard and the gang the trouble of an expensive bounty. She asks Picard if she can borrow some firearms, and Picard agrees, and I feel like Picard knows in that instance what she's about to do, that he didn't really manage to convince her to spare Giselle. Just the head turn that Patrick Stewart does when she asks that, Picard knows what she's about to do, and he knows that if he tries to lecture her out of it, he'll get nowhere. She's going to do what she needs to do, and if Picard can't save her now, maybe he can help her in the future. Before she leaves, she asks him about this time in the collective. Did he honestly feel like he reclaimed his humanity when he came back? He says yes, but when she asks all of him, we see Stewart pause and his eyes start to well up, and he softly says no. But we're both working on it, aren't we? This scene is why I really love Picard as a show. I'll get into some of the things that bother me in a sec, but this right here, the acting between Ryan and Stewart in that moment was very authentic and moving for me. I felt as if Picard knows Seven is trying to be a good person, and even though she's become very jaded and she's about to go kill Giselle, that she can still come back from that. The Voyager motif comes up as she beams away, and was some really nice fine acting from Stewart and Ryan. I really love that they used the Voyager motif as she beams away. Overall, it was a really nice scene between the two of them. When Seven confronts Giselle, Seven talks about Picard still having hope, and that Giselle took that away from Seven when Giselle took Egypt. We see Seven use the kill setting and disintegrate Giselle before taking on oncoming guards. And that's the last we see of Seven on this episode, but I'm sure we will see her again. Now, on to Agnes. We see Agnes, I think, getting closer to Rios than the others. The first scene with Agnes in this episode is her watching some home movies with her and Maddox. It's clear that they were a couple, or at least very close. He refers to her as Aggie. The few times this episode we see Agnes having what looks like panic attacks. The EMH tries to help her and later Maddox, but Agnes deactivates him each time. I think the panic attacks and anxiety she's feeling are rooted to something related to Daj and Soji. Something we haven't quite discovered yet, something related to these android twins being destroyers. When Picard and Maddox are talking in sickbay, we get a close-up shot of Jarati, so we know she's listening. When Maddox tells Picard that they are hiding something. Perhaps the Federation was hiding something. We see Agnes looking either concerned or saddened. There was a worry on Agnes's face during this scene, and I love how Alison Pill played that. We find out that this large conspiracy that Maddox had discovered is happening, and this was touched on in previous episodes with Rafi, and even this episode, who obviously became obsessed with probably the same conspiracy, which contributed to the rift that was caused between her son and her former husband. I feel that we're going to see Picard unearth this conspiracy, and that Rafi will be vindicated because she obviously told her son about this, probably her husband. She tried telling Picard after the Mars attack that something more was going on. And I think it's pretty obvious that there is more going on here, and that Rafi is going to be the character who saw it all coming. We find out that Maddox sent Soji to the artifact, which is a known place, at least by Picard and Rios, so we know that we'll probably be headed there next episode. Now, when Agnes shoos Picard away with the standard "he needs to rest" line, we can tell something's off. When they're alone, Maddox tells Agnes that Dahj and Soji are perfect. He did it. He was finally able to create another positronic brain, or at least that was implied, and that Agnes was instrumental on that. We see a range of emotions run through Agnes, but we can tell that something is about to happen. Something's a little bit off about her. Maddox telling Agnes that he was successful should have been a happy moment for Agnes Jarati. This should have been an elevating moment for her, but instead, we see pain on Jarati's face. We see despair. And that's when Jarati says that it was something to atone for, something else to atone for. We see Jarati kill Maddox by overdosing him or disconnecting him from the life support system. She deactivates EMH, who activates because there was a medical emergency. She doesn't want to do this, but as Maddox is dying, we see her tell him that she wishes she didn't know what she knows, and that she wishes they hadn't shown her. What that is, we don't know yet for sure, but it must have been something big. This must have been the result of Commodore O's meeting with Jarati, which we saw in a previous episode. I can only imagine that it's a classic Terminator Miles Dyson situation where her creation and or their work has led to something catastrophic or is going to lead to something catastrophic, and that's why we have Commodore O and other groups kind of, removing all the androids and banning them outright. Maybe there's just a piece of the puzzle we just haven't gotten yet, and it's either, and it's not quite clear yet if it's just fear of what might happen or they know something will happen. Just a few more notes on this episode. Stewart's French accent was not his best. I really wasn't into the whole get up until Picard realizes that Seven was using him to get to Giselle. We go from obviously not an actor Picard to very much actor Picard, who I was happy to see return once Picard realizes that, Seven was actually using him to get close to Giselle. But before that, I didn't quite like the French accent thing at all. By 2386, Icheb had risen to the rank of lieutenant in Starfleet and served aboard the USS Coleman. I'm glad that he was able to continue in Starfleet, but I'm very saddened that he has died, especially in such a brutal way. I'm also thinking that Icheb may have been one of the people that 7 of 9 felt was abandoned by Starfleet, as she was the one who came in to rescue him and not a Starfleet team. If Icheb is a Starfleet officer, I'm wondering why we didn't see a Starfleet rescue team. Maybe there was one sent, and for some reason they couldn't go this far, and 7 had to take up the cause. But I'm just curious as to why Starfleet didn't send an actual team. In regards to 7 of 9 drinking hard alcohol, I think that was also done to show that she can now tolerate hard alcohol. As we know, she had a very low tolerance while on Voyager. Giselle's band could emergency transport away, but not Giselle herself. I found that a little weird. Overall, I liked the episode, but I felt like it was a little too dark for my liking. This whole dress-up scene was a little cringy, and the reptilian alien who could smell a lie I felt was a little lame. There was a lot of swinging back and forth between dark and gritty and comedy with the dress-up kind of heist style of storytelling. I'm wondering if they knew that this episode was too dark and then tried to offset that with the whole French Picard pirate thing, but I really didn't think it worked, at least not for me. Let me know if you think it still worked or if you liked it in the comment section below. While I didn't like the costume scenes for the main characters, I did like the costuming that we see in the bar. I thought a lot of the costumes were indicative of what we might see in the 24th, 25th century. It sucks that 7 has become so jaded, but I can see Picard being a part of giving her hope again. It sounds like the Federation has again abandoned or left some people behind, and not just the Romulans. We've seen this with the human colonies along the Cardassian border that led to the creation of the Maquis. We didn't get any Soji or Borg cube scenes, but I'm pretty sure the next episode will be heavy on that. It sounds like the Romulan neutral zone has also collapsed, but there was no mention of the Klingon neutral zone and its current status. Quark was also mentioned, and I'm glad to see he's still in business. Both Maddox and Egypt were played by different people this episode. The original actors did not return. Jonathan Frakes directed this episode, and while this wasn't my favorite episode, especially some of the dress-up parts, I still loved the way he directed some of the scenes, particularly with Agnes and the Rafi scenes. I liked some of the camera angles used on Jarati when she was in the sickbay with Maddox. I love that Seven is back, even if it was just for this episode so far. And I love the 7 of 9 and Picard scenes. I think a lot of us have been waiting for these scenes for so long, and it was just great to finally get these two characters finally meet. I think the acting was what really stood up positively for me this episode, and for Picard as a series. The grittiness, I'm not quite liking. I'm kind of wishing they would dial it back just a hair, but I may have to keep in mind that it is because they are now on a streaming service, they're able to do something a little more gritty, a little more realistic, and they're kind of embracing that. It was a good episode, but I'm hoping for a return to form for the next episode, which I think will take us onto the Borg Cube, and maybe, possibly, just maybe, we might get to see Picard either arriving at the artifact, or at least Soji maybe finally awakening, but we'll just have to wait and find out. The Trekily theme is Gravity by Stanley Gurvich, found on Artlist. All stock images and videos were acquired through Pixabay, podcasting services acquired through Spreaker. All images and videos related to Star Trek are owned by CBS Corporation and are used within fair use laws. Please don't sue us.
Thanks for being aboard today. If you like the show, please like and subscribe. Hit that notification button. We really enjoy doing these episodes, and if you'd like to support the show, please consider buying us a coffee. You can do that on cooldiscuss.com, where you can also check out our other shows. Until next time, we are the Borg. Resistance is futile.
Buy us a coffee.
Buy us a coffee.
Coffee, please.